Throughout history, free thinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
To another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. I am here with Armin Navabi. Armin, how are you?
Hello.
And my name is Ali Rizvi, so I'm Ali. Yeah, we both do this podcast together. In case you're listening to us for the very first time, so I'm not going to go into too much. Today, we are actually talking about a region, right, where the ex-Muslim movement. There's a lot of very, very prominent ex-Muslims from this region in Somalia, but we haven't really, at least on this show, gone into detail about the Somali ex-Muslim community. And apparently there are a lot of very prominent people, public figures that hail from Somalia. I mean, the most prominent is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was one of the most, the pioneering ex-Muslims. And then there's also the Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. She's not an ex-Muslim, she's religious, but there are a lot of prominent people from the Somali diaspora who are, who have a lot of public influence. So today we're joined with Nun Benson. Now, Nun Benson is a Somali ex-Muslim, and she has publicly shared her views on Islam's tolerance of slavery, about some of the anti-black sentiment within the Muslim communities, the destructive influence of Islamic imperialism in Somalia, and the anti-black racism that happens in Muslim communities. And so she's joining us today. And from Australia, right, Nun?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you here, and I'm really, really looking forward to this. And I expect I'm going to learn a lot more about things that I didn't know that much about before. So really, really thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to be on with you guys.
Yeah, so let's start at the you actually come from a family where I think your great grandfather was an Islamic theologian.
Scholar.
Right?
Yeah, scholar, right.
And
right. Sorry, Granddad.
Yeah, so so what you have done is you have followed the example of the Prophet Muhammad and rejected the faith of your ancestors and your parents, and you have come out as an ex-Muslim atheist.
Right.
And so how did that happen in the space of a few generations?
To make it a really long, short story brief. Firstly, so my family is from the Sufi tradition. So they're from the Qadiriya school. So I don't really know how to describe it for your listeners. It's just I wouldn't say a milder version of Islam, but it's kind of, the Islam of my ancestors is one that they sort of mixed with the African traditions that were at the time. Oh. Sorry, Armin, were you going to say something?
No, I was just so curious. Like, I want to now learn a lot more. Just because mixing Islam with African traditions, I just want to know how that happened. How's that work? Yeah. What got make? Like, it just seems like a whole world of knowledge that I don't know about, and I just want to learn.
Keep going, Armin. When he gets excited, he does little grunts and little sounds here and there. But just ignore me. Keep going.
Just
if he wants to jump in, believe me, he's going to jump in.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Don't worry.
I was going to say it's not that exciting. It's pretty similar to like other Sufi traditions, like in Turkey or Pakistan or whatever. So they kind of just, I guess, so what my people, they celebrate like Mawlid, the Prophet's birthday. Like some people do Ashura, like this. You know how the Shia, some Sufis do that. In my family, it's an important day. So this is generally things that other mainstream Sunnis. So, and I just want to clarify, a lot of people think Sufis are not Sunni. So we are. It's just the way I grew up and the way it was understood to me was there's a literal version of Islam and then there's a more metaphorical understanding of Islam. So my people kind of have a more metaphorical understanding. So, for example, in the verse that says that you can have 4 wives. So my people kind of understand it like you know, it's kind of a metaphor because you can never love anybody, like more than two people at once. At the same, you can't love two people the same at once.
Yeah.
So Sufi would look at that and say, you know what, it's probably best that you just stick to your one wife and just take this as a metaphor. Not that they don't accept polygamy, they definitely are polygamists, but I'm just saying that's an example of like how just more moderate.
Just to be clear, there are some Sufis that are closer to Sunnis, and there are also some Sufis that are closer to Shias. So it goes both ways. A lot of Sufis that are closer to Shias refer to Sufism as Irfan rather than Sufism because they don't want to get mixed with the Sufis that are Sunni. But it's basically the same kind of thing, yeah.
Right. So the Islam of my family is pretty, you know, I think it's pretty, I guess, what in the modern sense they would call liberal, right? There's a lot of conservatism in it, but, you know, on the surface, if you compare it to a Salafi type of version of Islam, it's really liberal. Anyways, so that was what the Islam of Somalia was like prior to the civil war. Somalis were pretty easygoing about things like music, for example. Music wasn't taboo. Women sort of dressed. They didn't, you know, hijab wasn't something that was a staple like it is post-war. So yeah, that's the Islam of my ancestors. But so growing up in Australia, I actually learned a different version of Islam because I went to like normal Islamic schools.
Normal. And
so normal Islamic, so Arab Islamic school. So that's when I was taught Salafism, you know. So So
you consider the Islam of your grandparents, the Sufi Islam, as a unique kind of Islam, and the Islam that you learned in Australia because you were born in Australia and raised with that Islam is more mainstream kind of Islam.
Right. Okay. So just to give you an example, by the time I was 7, so I started going to Islamic school at like 4. So by the time I was 7, I was telling my mom that I didn't want to celebrate Mawlid anymore because I felt like Mawlid, because I was learning at school that Mawlid was bid'ah, you know, innovation. So, you know, obviously innovation's not allowed and stuff like that. So not only that, I remember at like 8 years old, I was like a little Palestinian activist because the school that I went to was, you know, mainly Lebanese, Palestinian type. So Levantine Muslims. So I remember I came home one day and I had a massive Palestinian banner on my forehead. And I just remember, like, because, you know, every day we were hearing about Palestine, constantly praying for them, listening to their stories, you know, about, you know, the things that were happening there. So I remember I went home that day and my auntie, who was extremely liberal, and she had an Italian husband actually at the time. I remember I came home with a Palestinian flag on my forehead and she said, who taught you, like, who taught you this? And then I was just like, and I was telling her, oh my God, you know, I remember I was so passionate. I was like, you know, Israel's killing Muslims. That I was like 7 years old, legitly. And I had
who asked you that question?
So it was my mum's younger sister.
Okay.
So my aunt,
Was she concerned? Is that why?
Yeah, she was extremely concerned. Yeah, and I remember she turned to my mum and she started yelling at my mum to say, like, "What is the school that you're sending your child to?" Like, she's like, you know, because she's like, no, because I was so passionate and anti-Israel. Like, I was like, you know, Israel's the enemy, and she's like, no, Jewish people are not the enemy. Like, we're not. She's like, who taught you this? It's wrong, you know.
Okay, why was your aunt concerned? So did she consider that a sign of extremism or something like that when she saw that? Like, why was that a trigger for her?
Okay, so that's a really great question. So basically what I think my auntie was witnessing was the conversion of her own Somali community from the Sufi traditions to the Salafi. So what happened was after the war, so after the civil war in Somalia, that was like 92, right? So I was born about 89. So 92, what happened was missionaries came from Saudi Arabia and from Egypt. So Salafis came from Egypt and Wahhabis came from Saudi Arabia to help the Somali people with food and all of that.
For the people that are listening to this on a podcast, when you said when you said help, you did the air quotes. Okay, right.
Air quotes. So I mean, they were giving aid, I guess, you know, but under the guise with that aid came a newer, different version of Islam. So it was like, you guys, FYI, here's this food, here's these resources, but FYI, the Islam of your ancestors was wrong.
Right.
And, you know, you guys could do better. So
this is very interesting. This is what Iran does with other areas close to them as well. And so your aunt basically was familiar with what's happening back in Somalia, and because she saw what happened to Somalia, and now she's basically recognizing the same thing happening to you, similar to what happened back home. So that's the reason, right? Wow. See, this is the kind of insight and information that you can't really find in like books or like articles like this. This is why I love these kind of interviews. This is amazing. Okay, go on.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, the missionary thing is just, that's just classic. I mean, for people, to know about this, one of the reasons that Hamas actually had so much popularity in Gaza compared to the secular sort of Fatah,
right,
in Palestine, the West Bank, is because they provided hospital services. They gave you food, they gave money to the families of people who died in suicide bombings and stuff like that. So they, when people are, destitute, and when they are disenfranchised, they want those daily things that'll help them survive. And Fatah, even though it was secular, and most people probably would have aligned with them, they were just corrupt and they couldn't provide anything. And this is why missionaries are so. It's a very, very. This is what we somehow shoot ourselves in the foot. Yeah, sometimes when we drop the ball on these things.
This is also what happened in Afghanistan, right? Like the Islam that they were practicing there was very different from what happened when the Wahhabis showed up. Like people could recognize everything is changing, and when they were building the madrasas and introducing people to what they considered the authentic version. But go on, you were on your story, right? So you became you're 7. What happens next?
So I just wanted to say, because I was born in Australia and I obviously wasn't in Somalia to witness the transition, how I noticed that my community was definitely becoming, I guess, more extreme. So there was a wave of Somalis that came in the 80s. So these were skilled migrants like my mum's generation. They would have came from wealthier families. So those first Somalis that came, right, they were very liberal. Like it was very loose hijabs. Like it was very, like my uncles, I just remember, when I was growing up, up until I was 10, like men and women would sit in rooms together. There was no sort of separation and segregation. Yeah. But as I got older, what I noticed is the more Somali refugees had come, these were like the ones that had actually experienced the war and all of that, and was sort of, I guess, had the trauma. They were extremely religious. So the demographics started to change, So right. By the time I was 12, for example, so the neighborhood that I lived in, before when I was younger, like Somalis didn't really know each other, they didn't really care. But by the time I was 12, my area was sort of like filled with new Somali migrants, and things like, there was a swimming pool near my house. I couldn't go to that no more because my mum was like kind of hyper aware of her community. She's just like, kind of like, don't shame me now that these people are here. Oh, they can see. Yeah. So my life, as the community came...
How old were you at this point?
So around 12 when like the...
So you're a 12-year-old girl and there's a swimming pool and you can't go have fun because of the changing environment around you.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm in Australia and everything, but my mum's just like, just don't shame us, Yeah. And obviously because my grandfather's a chef, it's like, it's actually my immediate family is extremely liberal, actually probably too liberal. A lot of Somalis say that they have this saying, they laugh and joke, they say the sheikh's children are often the worst of the bunch, like kind of the preacher's kids are the worst.
Right.
So my immediate family is really liberal, but at the same time they have this kind of thing where they want to uphold the ways of my ancestors. So they're like, just don't do anything in public type,
Don't bring shame to our family.
Don't bring shame to us. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's their mentality.
That's so
So so this is interesting. So you came from a Sufi tradition that was fairly open. Everything was metaphorical. You had the more of an intellectual tradition where you had scholarly ancestry. With your great grandfather and so on. And then you come to Australia, and then you find the more mainstream version of Islam, which is Wahhabi, Salafist, and you're like, okay, So when you left, why did you? Was there a point where you thought, okay, I can go back to being Sufi. This makes more sense. I can live within this. Why leave it all together and become an ex-Muslim and just let it all go?
Because the Sufis have problems as well too. So I think I now see it holistically from each side. So when I was 18, I went to Europe. And so I'd always had these stories on my ancestors. You know, people always used to, and these people have ridiculous stories. I'm talking about the Sufis. They're like, oh, your grandfather cured the blind. I'm like, sure he did. And this
Your grandfather did what?
Cured the blind.
Cured the blind. Okay, wow. Okay.
This is also a reason. Like my family, put it this way. Like my family. I always used to ask my mom, I'm like, how did you come to Australia back before the war? Like, how did my grandfathers have money? And they're like, my mom always used to be like, oh, there were sheikhs. And I'm like, but how do sheikhs make money? Never made sense to me,
Right.
So when I was 18, I went to Europe. Did a lot of research and just found out a lot of stuff about my family and my ancestors. So a lot of people said that, the Sufis, what people started to dislike about them they were very manipulative. So what they would do was, they kind of withheld information from the public, and they would say things like, I would curse you. They had all these traditions of cursing, and if you don't give me X, Y, and Z,
right.
Something will happen to your children. I don't know how to explain that. But
there's a lot of mysticism going on, and a lot of spells and curses, and talking to demons and spirits, and it's all.
People get sick of that.
Yeah, the thing with Sufism compared to traditional Shia Islam and traditional Sunni Islam is that it's a lot more vague. Rather, like Sunni Islam is it's very specific. This is how things are. Like everything is divine to the very, and Shia Islam also, they have completely everything is specific. Sufism is so vague that you could just make stuff up as you go, right?
Exactly.
And you could, and that's what. I think it makes it sometimes very, very dangerous because you're more flexible in what you can make up, right? Like even I say when you have magic on your side, you could always excuse everything, but Shiism and Sunnism, they have some limits. Like no, this is bid'ah, this is un-Islamic. Sufism, the limits are your imagination, right? Right. But yeah, go on.
For example. So, for example, my grandfathers are buried in Ethiopia, in a specific spot in Ethiopia. There are some Sufis that will not go to Hajj. They'll make a pilgrimage to pray on these sheikhs. So this is the kind of ancestry I'm from.
Right.
Pray on the sheikhs and stuff like that. So my family essentially made money because we were the children of these sheikhs. So people would make sure that, we never had to work, we never had to do X, Y, and Z. Do you get what I'm saying? Based off. And, within that ambiguity, that's what people started to hate about the Sufis. They're like, these people are kind of manipulating us. Right. Everything is kind of, the rules are not so black and white. The rules can change. So I think within that ambiguity, people started to crave a more literal tradition. Do you get what I'm saying?
Right.
So later, after the Civil War, and, after all these events, I think people started to crave more structure, and didn't want any of the intermediaries, which makes sense,
So for people outside looking in, Sufism looks sometimes a little bit better because they think, because it looks like, oh, maybe because it's flexible, maybe it could be peaceful. Well, yeah, but if it's flexible, it could also be extremely, troubling. But also, a lot of people at some point, they feel insecure if their ideology is not giving them some pretty, some structure, like as you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like very specific. It's just everything is just woo-woo, right? So I think that's why sometimes people that are from a Sufi tradition get attracted to a more Sunni or Shia tradition because they want more structure, they want more concrete answers to their questions, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I kind of look at my ancestors like, those evangelical preachers in the Bible Belt in America that sort of like hit people in the head and say they've been cured. Right. That's what my ancestors used to do, basically. So you went to Europe just for doing research? No. I was going to Europe for a holiday, right. But I'm saying during that period, I was meeting my family.
Right.
So, people are obviously sharing stories about my forefathers.
Right.
And then so I connected some dots. It wasn't explicitly told to me.
Right.
But, I've taken stories from here and there and just connected the dots.
Right. So what made you an atheist? At what point you became an atheist? Like, do you remember the transition? Was it fast? Was it slow?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
was it like an immediate thing? Did you go through stages?
Right.
Having come from like a sort of, I know that you said that Sufism has problems and everything like that, but did you? Was it a gradual process where you're like, okay, well, maybe this is something I can entertain before you let it go, or was it just like this moment where there was a realization?
I'd say 3 years ago, I definitely became an atheist. And you know what? Imtiaz Shams, the London, I think says it the best when he says, it's not that, you learn any new information, especially when you're born into Islam, it's not that I learned anything new. It wasn't an aha moment. It's just that as you grow and you change, you evolve your morals, you look back and reflect on things and you think, is that right? Like, is that right for me now? Like, it made sense to me when I was, 10 or 15, but now, I don't know, things like, Aisha's age, slavery, the fact that, when I really reflected on it as an adult, the fact that God banned alcohol in stages but did not ban slavery, for me, that was just like, it pushed me over the edge, I was just, and it was really quick for me. It wasn't like, I didn't have like, this grieving period. I missed it. I was like, nah, that's it. Okay. When I realized that Muhammad was like kind of a pedophile, I was like, nah, that's it. I'm done.
Right. Did you tell your family or your parents, and what was the reaction?
I have told my mom and stuff like that. Look, my family, because my mom is Sufi, she was definitely not happy about it.
Right.
But they've got more of a lakum dinukum walidin mentality, So before that, the abrogated verses.
That's to you is your religion, to me is my religion.
But this is not even a deen. This is not even a religion.
It's not even a deen. Yeah, I know. It's not even. But my mom tells me straight up, like my mom's pretty honest with it. She's like, look, I love you to death, but I know you're going to hell,
Oh, shit. But
I can't do anything for you.
Did you ask her... What do you think about a God that is going to send your daughter that you love to hell? Did you ask her that?
Yeah, my mum is not really one to have these sort of debates with.
Okay.
So she's just like, just be glad that I love you.
You're not going to listen. None of it. Even if we take the Pascal's wager and all that stuff, and if we die and suddenly by some weird, this really would be a miracle. Is that if Islam is real? If God is real, I don't think he's sending us to hell. When people ask me about it, they're like, aren't you worried about going to hell? I'm like, there's no way I'm going to hell. Like, if God is more merciful, more beneficent, more powerful, more intelligent than me, then
that's not a strong argument, because God could be not merciful.
Listen, it's not an argument. We're talking to religious people.
Right.
Religious
it's not
people.
about an argument.
Right.
And my mom also says,
yeah.
I was going to say, my mom also says, how in Islam, after 15, how you're no longer responsible for a child after 15. So my mom loves those verses. My mom's been repeating that since long before I was ex-Muslim.
She just washed her hands.
My mom was like, just giving you a heads up, my prayer is sorted, my akhirah is set. Yours is a bit shaky, But my mom always says to me things like, after 15, it's not on me, you're going to hell by yourself. Just she reiterates that.
Yeah.
If it was me, I would be asking her like, okay, so how could you enjoy heaven knowing that I'm screaming in pain? Well, would you be able to enjoy heaven while you're there? I would ask these questions. I can't help myself, sorry, but I would.
Yeah. My mom is so mellow. She would just grab a little tusbah and just ignore you. Just start making dua.
That's the thing. I mean, you can't get anywhere with those things. Right. So I have to ask you something. You mentioned. Right. You mentioned slavery, right? You mentioned that Islam didn't ban slavery. You've also been very vocal about the racism, the anti-black racism within Muslim communities, which is true in Pakistani families. I'm talking about mainstream Pakistani Indian families. You come home with anybody else, you come home with a black friend, not even a boyfriend or girlfriend. It's they tell you not to go to black neighborhoods. It's in the Muslim world in Saudi Arabia. They treated black people horribly. There is a tradition I should mention. Muhammad had Bilal was the slave. He was the black man who did the first adhan, and he freed him. But then he also owned other slaves. I mean, it's a complicated history. But how did you? How do you?
What's your
see that in the what is it generally within the Somali community, not just the ex-Muslim community, but the Muslim community, how do they see that as a?
Do they
look at Islam as something that freed the slaves?
Sure.
Or?
Yeah, go on.
It's Somalis actually had a role in the slave trade. They were actually sold other Black Africans. So it's a really complicated history on their part as well too. So even in Somalia right now, we've got a population of people similar to African Americans and people like Africans that were taken from other places when slavery ended.
Right.
They kind of just stayed in Somalia. You know what I mean? So. We've got a really complicated history with slavery in terms of that. What did I say? So I remember at Islamic school, for example, it was just normal for them to call us Abid, so black dog, So,
Abid, by the way, Abid, can you explain people? Abid means slave.
Abid is slave, but to me, it's like nigger. It really has it's no different.
Right.
Honestly,
wait. So let's just be clear. Other Muslims not refer to Somali Muslims as slaves.
All black. All Africans.
Right.
Yes.
All black. Okay. Let me clarify that. So a lot of Arab Muslims are refer to black Muslims as slaves. You just talk. When they want to refer to them, they refer to them as slaves.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Abid. Right.
So it's really no different from white racism. It's kind of as a black person,
or any racism.
Any racism is all the same. It's all.
No, but this is a little bit more extreme, actually. There are some racism where you're somewhat prejudiced towards a certain group of people, but to call them slaves, I think that's a little bit more extreme than average. No.
Yes, but Muslims will turn around and say, they've got all these things. They'll say, but we're all slaves, Abdullah.
But then why don't? Why don't you refer to non-black Muslims as slaves?
No, but I'll tell you. Actually, that's a good point, Nun. There was a defense that they have for that because Abd has become such a common word. Right. So, for instance. The name of Muhammad's father was Abdullah.
Yeah, but they mean slave of
God. Slave of Allah.
Yeah.
Right? So Abdul Malik is another name for Allah. Abdul Rahim, Abdul Rahman. These are basically slaves of God. So the word itself is normalized in. But
context. But just to be, I just want to destroy this right away because what matters is
destroying it. I'm
not
defending it.
It's the context what matters, right? So when you refer to when you use Abid in the name, people know you mean Abid is the slave of God. But when you're just referring to black people only as Abid, and then you refer to non-black people as Abid, that means that you're talking about something else. You're talking about
exactly. But what I'm trying to say is that. What they have done is that they have a defense for it. They're like, look, there are many people whose first names, because they've become westernized, is Abdul. Because, their full name is Abdul Rahman, slave of God. Abdul just means slave of. So, you've heard that. Paula Abdul, right?
Yes.
Right.
Right. So that's become a very normalized kind of thing where the connotative evil of it has been lost.
No, it's not normalized. It's normalized only as part of a name. It's not normalized to just refer to somebody as Abid.
Yeah,
but that does have an effect, right? When in normal parlance.
It only has an effect to foreigners where they don't understand the context. Within the Muslim community, they know the difference.
Right, but what foreigners do does affect the. Anyway, we could go on with this, but it is a derogatory. And I remember in Saudi Arabia they did that, and they when I was living in Saudi Arabia, and for the Indians and Pakistanis too. They looked at us as inferior, not as bad as the black people. No, but they still
basically depends on how dark you are. So Pakistanis and Indians are below Arabs. But because they're not black, they're not that bad, right? So that's
exactly. Exactly. Right. Black people are at the lowest of the totem pole in that,
Let me actually really quickly tell you what we learned in school in Iran, which for some reason I could not see that this is a problem when they were teaching us in school. They taught Balal, right? The black Balal is the famous azan singer, the call to prayer, which had a beautiful voice, and he was I think the famous black slave that became a Muslim. We were told in school that Balal had just such a beautiful voice and he was such a good Muslim then when he died and went to heaven, his skin turned white.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we were, and we thought that was such a beautiful story. What a beautiful reward that is!
Amazing! Oh my God, he finally got his wish
right.
to turn white.
Oh no! So from low risk of skin cancer to high risk of skin cancer.
I know, right? It's crazy.
But have you experienced that personally ever from other Muslims when you were a Muslim?
Abed? Yeah, no. For sure.
Oh,
what? Like, I've even been. I remember when I was young, they used to say at Islamic school. I remember the Arab kids used to tell us. They'd say, "Oh, the teachers taught us that you guys are not real Muslims because you guys are black." You know.
What?
And then we're like, "What do you mean?" They're like, real Muslims can't be black. Like, as in they had actually internalized. So their parents and their culture would tell them things like, these people will never go to heaven because they're already black.
Okay, but let's be fair though. That's not Islamic teaching.
That's not Islamic teaching. I wanted to say as well too, like there are certain aspects, like for example, with the slavery, with European slavery, if you were a slave of African descent, there was that one drop rule. You would never get out of that kind of ranking or class in life. Whereas with Arab slavery, what they used to do was, so an Arab would rape, like just say an African woman, they would have a child. That child would be born free because the father is Arab.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So I feel like that created a different level of loyalty with African Muslims. Do you get what I'm saying? Because you could be of Arab. Yeah, exactly. There's a potential to be free. And if you were because technically Arab descent is, if you're of paternal Arab descent, doesn't matter what color you are, you're technically an Arab, right?
Right.
So Arab is kind of like
But
that's really interesting. Hold on, Armin.
Yeah.
So that's just before I lose this thought. That actually is really interesting because one of a similar kind of story for the Indian subcontinent was that in India you had the caste system, right? So in the Hinduism, and then the lower caste, and when the Arabs came, when the Muslims came to invade India, the Indian subcontinent, right? A lot of people from the lower castes converted to Islam, because the whole Islam thing was, in Islam, once you say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, you're equal to everybody. Everybody's the same. Right. You go to Hajj, you all wear the same ihram. You can't tell who's a billionaire, who's black, white, whatever. Right. So that was it's
very appealing.
So did that have a role in maybe a lot of the sort of a lot of the black Muslim community? Does that have appeal?
I was going to say, I should stipulate that, actually Muslims are so a lot of Islam came to Africa through, merchants, it wasn't only through slavery, but they were very strategic, these Muslims. What they would do is they would convert certain tribes, and they would not convert other tribes so they could enslave them. Because remember, in Islam, a Muslim can't be a slave, but a non-Muslim, though, can be enslaved.
Actually, a Muslim can be a slave in Islam.
No, you can't be a slave. You can't enslave a Muslim.
Well, Bilal was a slave and he was a Muslim. Abu Bakr set him free.
No, but Bilal wasn't.
He can't be born
a Muslim.
No, he
wasn't a slave anymore.
No, he was Ali. Bilal was a slave while Muhammad was.
He wasn't born into Islam.
Okay, that's the difference. Well, you can't be, as a Muslim, you can't be once born into slavery. But you can be if you're a slave, you can't just be like, oh, I'm a Muslim now I'm not a slave anymore. No, you still remain a slave. So you you can definitely be a Muslim and be a slave. You can't just be born into slavery, right? Bilal, for example, for a lot of in fact, Muhammad never bothered to free Bilal. Did you know that? Like when he died, Muhammad died, Bilal was still a slave. Abu Bakr set him free. Like when I heard that story, like what the hell? Like this was supposed to be like one of the greatest Muslims ever, and Muhammad never took the time to actually set Bilal free.
Is that right though?
Yeah.
But you know what? Muhammad kind of died randomly. Like, we're still talking about him like he's some kind of prophet. He died randomly. He had no idea what he was doing. Right. He had a lot of issues before he died. Like as in managing the different. The Ummah had grown, so he had so much issues on his plate. That's what I'm saying, before he died.
Right.
So.
But okay, I just want to clarify something because Ali cut me off. But his point was very good, so I'm glad he cut me off. But there was regarding. I want to be fair.
You're gonna hear a lot of this.
I want to really be fair to Islamic teaching because I'm very much against Islamic teaching. But there's nothing in Islam itself that is racist. It is tribal, but is not, that tribalism is not based on racism. Muhammad's whole teaching was, I'm destroying all tribes and creating a super tribe, and once you come to my tribe, everybody is equal. Like, if you're a Muslim, it doesn't matter your ethnicity, if you're black, Jew, whatever, Roman, whatever. Once you're a Muslim, we're all equal. That sounds pretty good, right? Like, that sounds like, wow, that's pretty, like, everybody, that is promoting equality. And Muslims defend that. Muslims say, like, listen, yes, there's a lot of racism in the Islamic community, but that's just Muslims. That's not Islam. Islam is not racist. And they are correct. However, I don't think Islam is still extremely tribal, because what I point out in that situation is that there is still the idea that Muslims are superior to non-Muslims, right? So even though there is no tribalism based on race or nationality, Islam itself does teach a different kind of superiority, and that's the superiority of Muslims over non-Muslims. So you create a super tribe, just like Genghis Khan, for example.
I disagree there. I have to disagree just here. Because I was just thinking about, I was going to say, yeah, Islam technically isn't racist. Yeah, in theory, right? But in a way, it actually really is. How? Because it's a supremacist tradition. For example, you know, my name is Nuria right now. You know, I'm obviously a black woman of African descent. If you see my name, like, my culture has been erased. You know, I'm now, I guess, a black Arab, if you like, you know, So Islam, I'm saying, is racist in the sense that Arabic is the supreme language. Arabs are, you know, it's a super Arab tribe. You know, you can't take away from the fact that it's not, Islam is not a tribe of, you know, it is it is one nation under one. Is it
Ummah?
One Ummah. It is one nation, one community, one Ummah. But it's still a supremacist tradition in that, you know.
Yeah, it's just
the Arabic race.
It's Arab supremacy.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not
Arab around the world.
Well, it's not Arab supremacy. Okay, so Arabs themselves, once Muhammad died, practiced Arab supremacy. But the teaching itself, like if you read the Hadith and the Quran, it is a supremacist religion, but it's not Arab supremacist. It's basically Muslim supremacist religion.
But hang on. You pray in Arabic. This is the issue. You pray in Arabic. The Quran is in Arabic. You speak to God in Arabic. You face Mecca, exactly.
But that's location, that's language. That's neither of those are race. Right?
The 3 holy cities in Islam are all Arab cities, including Palestine.
Right.
It's an Arab supremacist tradition. It's the same thing as like how it's, you know, Christianity was used to fuel European imperialism. The same thing as Islam, you know.
Yeah, but I actually wait. The things that you mentioned are language and location. They're not a race, right? And again, I'm agreeing that it's a supremacist religion, but it's not based on ethnicity. Again, in practice, it's based on ethnicity, but there's nothing in the Quran or in the Hadith that's written that supports that.
But I'm saying the whole Quran itself is in Arabic, and that's what I'm doing. That's the proof itself. The Hadith.
But that's a language, not a race. Arabic. But that's a language, not a race. Like English, for example, English is not a race, right? English is not like a white race.
Okay, but the Bible. Okay, hang on. For example, the Bible is in Giz, it's in Greek, it's in Aramaic. You know, every language the Bible can be read. The Quran cannot. It has to be understood in Fusha.
So it's a language supremacist.
I get okay. So Armin, I have to say, I get what you're saying. I understand that. Okay, they use the language, but that doesn't mean that non-Arabs who come into it will be unequal.
Right.
Yes, officially it doesn't mean that, but it's a very sort of. I actually agree with Nun here. I think that just overall, it is not. On paper and public facing, yes, you know, everybody's equal, but behind the scenes, I mean, this is actually pretty deep.
Yeah, in practice, I know it is. I know that Muslims are in practice extremely racist, right? I know that, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Also.
So, but I agree that.
Wait. Also, the academic scholarship on this, and we had Tom Holland recently on the podcast, and what he would say is that that Arab imperialism and the Arab conquest preceded Islam, and Islam later emerged as a tool to be able to aid the Arab conquest and to fuel it and to sort of catalyze it. So I think that's.
Okay, would you guys agree with this that Christianity and Islam compared to other religions before them are less racist? because every other
No.
religion before Islam and Christianity were ethno-religions. Like Zoroastrianism was a Persian religion, Judaism was a Jewish religion, the Roman religion was for the Romans, the the Greek religion was for the Greeks. The Christianity and Islam are the only two religions. Well, I mean, the only two main religions.
I would separate Christianity out of it. Judaism is based on the chosen people.
No,
I mean, and matrilineal.
No, but
You have an ethnic.
But Christianity divorced the religion from an ethnicity when the Romans were able to become Christian, right? I just think, like, historically, everything before
Christianity does have the Old Testament.
Everything before Christianity was way more racist than Christianity and Islam.
No, I disagree. I mean, I have to disagree with you there. I'm really sorry. The fact that I have to learn as an African, Arabic to read the Quran is racist. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Point blank period. There's nothing else to it.
Okay.
I think they're racist in different ways. I think they're racist in different ways.
The fact that I have to understand the Arabic language and the Arabic culture in order to understand faith of my, is to me racist.
Right. By the way, this is very interesting for a lot of our audience when they meet, because a lot of people, when they hear racism and imperialism, they usually think about the Europeans, right? So when you talk about the Arab Empire and Islam, and you're talking about them as the imperialists and the racists, people are like, what? A lot of people, this is a very new way of looking at history and the world.
I think it's great. That's something that you are going to hear from somebody from Nun's background a lot more, because there's this other side. There's this idea that British imperialism, Western imperialism was terrible, but Arab imperialism, which was that somehow people just ignore that it ever existed. I mean, if you're against Western imperialism, but you're not against the Arab and Islamic imperialism,
you're a hypocrite.
That you are not anti-imperialism. You're just anti-West. That's all you are.
But this is
I also want to say.
Nun, go ahead.
No, just before I forget, this is why I'm happy that Nun is starting her podcast, because this is the kind of context and that we're missing. So yeah, but go on, sorry.
Yeah, I also wanted to say there's also a lot of evidence that Arab slavery was far more brutal than the European version of slaves. So, for example, there's all these records that say that actually there was millions of slaves that were taken to the Middle East, but the reason we don't see the footprints of those slaves, for example, you know how in Brazil right now, the second highest population of black people outside of Nigeria is in Brazil, because of slavery, right?
Didn't know that.
So in the Middle East, they used to castrate male slaves.
Right.
So you couldn't reproduce, and they used to rape the women. So essentially they raped out. So Arab slavery was that brutal that they essentially wiped out a whole generation of African people,
Yeah, like the Europeans didn't do that, but again, even if you could find examples of, like, a lot of Muslims do this, find examples of slavery that Muslims did that wasn't as brutal, and they think that's a defense of their slavery. That's like forced labor. What the hell are you talking about? It's kind of like kidnapping like a child, right? And then treating her from her parents, and then buying toys for her, and you want like a medal for like treating her nicely. Like, you kidnapped the kid. Like, what the hell are you? You don't deserve a medal.
There's I think generally nobody cares if African Muslims die. They just don't. I mean, the most egregious example of this, and I remember it was one of the first things I wrote about when I started writing for HuffPost, was this Omar al-Bashir, right? Sudan.
Sudan, yeah.
Arab guy, Arab leader, just killed like 500,000 in the first few years 500,000 black Muslims. So these are 500,000, 500,000 black Muslims have died within a matter of years, just a few years. And the moment something happened in Gaza, everybody's freaking out, right? It's because it was the Jews doing it, or because it was something else. But when an Arab Muslim killed, 500,000 black Muslims, really nobody apart from George Clooney, to some extent, like, really cared what was.
Well, they're doing it right now in Libya. They're not only
absolutely
in Libya. It's so bad. They're stealing. Like, it is horrific what is happening.
They are enslaving, like
they're taking their organs out. Not to mention, they're getting the victims, the slaves, to call their families whilst they're being raped and tortured. It's just horrific what is going on.
Why didn't you think this get much coverage? Like, the amount of conflicts right now happening in Africa do not get any attention.
cannibalism in
because
Congo?
honestly, and I really don't like identity politics. I really don't subscribe. I hate the regressive left, but I have to agree with Black lives don't matter. They just don't matter. That's why things like those hashtags and stuff like it is so important, because really as a Black person, that's what it feels like. It really feels like our lives don't matter, and they're not of the same value as people of lighter skin.
Well, it's interesting that you had to mention that you don't like the regressive left or identity politics. But the thing is that the problem with the regressive left is not that there are not it's not based on movements and arguments that make sense. Like it is, like there is, the problem is that they are pointing to things that sometimes don't matter, and people dismiss the entire thing, not knowing that there's actually millions of people's lives that, you know what I mean? Like they're ruining, like they're a small, loud minority that are ruining movements that matter. Like these things, like the bigotry against Black people exists on a massive scale globally. That's a thing. That's not like made up. Okay, but what the problem with the regressive left is that they are betraying Black people by destroying the PR of these movements. You know what I mean? Like they're making it look ridiculous, and millions of people might suffer because of people now think like, oh, if I say, oh, Black people are suffering, you're like, oh yeah, sure, identity politics. No, it's happening, and I think this is a tragedy that the regressive left is responsible for. And also, identity politics is not always bad, because identity politics is bad when you think like, this is my identity, I want privilege. But if you say that's the wrong way to play identity politics. But identity politics makes sense if it's like, hey, my identity is being targeted, please help me, right?
Well, I'm being targeted because of my identity.
If you say I'm being targeted because of my identity, please protect me. That is identity politics, and that's
we wouldn't have had civil rights or anything like that without identity politics, gay rights, all that. So of course, I mean, absolutely.
And it's a good time to interject and say that civil rights would never. You do realize that slavery had not ended in Saudi Arabia if it wasn't till 1967, till the civil rights movement in America. And this is also why I no longer respect Malcolm X. I'm sorry, Black Muslims, please don't message me. But I don't have any respect for him, because he went to Mecca and he witnessed Black slaves. There was Black slaves there. There was eunuchs cleaning the Kaaba. And by the way, till this day, Ethiopian little boys that have been castrated still clean the Kaaba. So it's not like it's something from a
distant time. Wait, they're castrating them today?
I mean, they've got
what?
Young African boys.
Yeah, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? They don't give a shit. I mean, those people are. They don't care.
Okay.
The religious authorities in Saudi Arabia.
Why don't I know this? Okay, we need to cover this stuff. This is crazy.
Armin, I've seen. Okay, this is like obviously last time I'm speaking about the late '80s, early '90s, but. In Masjid al-Nabawi in the Mosque of Medina, when it was time for the men to leave and for the women to come and pray, or the women to leave and for the men to come and pray, they would take their sticks out and they would start hitting the women while they were praying. I saw it happen as a kid. I saw that. Like they're hitting the women like how you sort of herd sheep and cows. Like they were doing that to get them out of there while they were praying. So because it was the men's time, they did the same thing with kids, the Black people who were driving. It's just they don't care. I wouldn't have any hesitation believing that that's what happened.
Right. So going back to Malcolm X, you're saying Malcolm X came but for people that don't know, when Malcolm X came to Saudi Arabia, the message that
I personally believe he's a hypocrite.
Right. So
in my opinion, because he didn't advocate for.
Yeah, but before you say that, because I want people to get context, it's like his message was Islam is great because it gives us equality among races, right?
Absolutely,
so you think that's nonsense, because what he saw was actually something else, which is what? Go on, sorry.
So what I'm saying, so at the time there would have been slavery in Saudi Arabia, and if it wasn't for the US government, it was JFK at the time, pressuring the Saudi government to end slavery, they had open slave markets,
Right.
So I guess, so there's a lot of criticism. So this is not my own personal critique. A lot of other Black ex-Muslims have actually come up with this. And yeah, so he's just, I just think I think hypocrite's maybe a strong word, but yeah, he just didn't advocate when he had that opportunity.
Right. One thing I want to mention, by the way, slavery still exists in Saudi Arabia in other forms, especially among Filipinos that are there, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they feel like even the Muslims, some Muslims that think like, we shouldn't treat our fellow black Muslims like this.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think there's any problem to treat like Filipinos like this because first of all they are a different race and they're not even Muslim, so they are completely whatever you do, you could do whatever you want with them. But the way that they do it is they don't really call them slaves. They just get them there and they take their passport away, and they now they're dependent on their masters for food, for sleeping, for everything, and they can't leave. So that's technically forced labor, which is technically slavery. Right.
Yeah, there's all kinds of slavery. Like even they're doing it all over the Gulf. It's definitely not only Africa. It's a class war. It's poor people from around the world. So,
right.
Yeah.
So you wanted to let me know. I'm going to mention what you wanted to also talk about today, which was Ayaan Hirsi Ali. But before we go there, did you wanted to bring? Is there anything else that you really wanted to touch on that we didn't bring up?
Honestly, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff, but that's okay. I can't really think of anything.
We should have you back. We should have you back. We should have you back, especially Ali is muted. When you have your podcast back on, so we could introduce everybody to your podcast. But Ali,
I mean, before we move on to that, actually, this is something that you did want to talk about, so I want to bring it up. I had it on the list before we move on to Ayaan, and that is. Your podcast is going to be called, I don't know if this is you've already named it or if it's tentative. It's going to be called Waq Nation. That's a WAAQ Nation, and it's based on the Somali sky god Waq, right?
Right.
WAAQ. And what does this symbolize for Somali ex-Muslims when they do that? So this is Armin smiling. I don't know. I don't want to guess why he is, but I think he's also thinking about the Persian sort of how people go back to their own Zoroastrianism and everything. But what is it about this? Is there a reconnection or something? Or
right? It is. I was going to say it is based. So Waq, I was going to say is so a lot of people ask me about him. So Waq is just like this Somali sky god. So before Islam came, we had a tradition probably similar to, the Egyptians and in Sudan probably. We had a tradition similar to the ancient Egyptians, of multiple gods. So Waq is a supreme god. People say that we're monotheists. I don't really think we're monotheistic in the sense that the Abrahamic religions are.
A lot of polytheists now want to get along with the monotheists, and they claim that they're trying to clean up their history. And we're like, it was technically monotheism. It was just it was one god, but he took many shapes. They're just trying to fit into modern society. That's what they say. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So so we had many gods, but Waq was the supreme sky god that used to sort of, they used to call on for rain and stuff like that. So we have words like Barwaaqo, they're still used today. Barwaaqo means paradise in Somali, but the word itself is derived from rain from Waq, so rain from the sky god. And it also goes back to our roots in ancient Egypt, like, FGM. That's actually the origin of FGM, because Somali women have the highest rate of FGM in the world right now.
It's something like 98%, right?
Wait, how is the rain god related to FGM?
Okay, I'm of the opinion that FGM is not an Islamic problem; it's an African problem.
Oh, by the way, let's clarify this for people that don't know. FGM is female genital mutilation. I know most people know that, but just in case we have some new audiences, but go on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of ex-Muslims will say, it's Islamic, and I do accept that Islamic scholars later on adopted it. Right. But I believe it's a practice derived from the pharaohs of Egypt, so there's evidence now that the pharaohs used to do that to their wives. So when they would go on long trips, they would sew their wives to make sure that she wouldn't have sex with anybody else, and then they would unsew her when he would come back. You know what I'm saying? So it's a barbaric African.
Right, so it's mostly African, but Islam has been influenced by many different things, including Greek, Persian, Roman, and African. So just because it's just because it might have an African source, it doesn't mean that it's not in Islam. Like we do have
Definitely.
we do have hadith in Islam that backs it up. But you're saying the source of it was in Africa.
Yeah, it's an Egyptian thing. So even like Egyptian women as well too. Like I know you guys have Yasmin on as well. So in her culture, it would be So it's a North African, East African thing because we get it from Egypt,
Right.
The pharaohs used to do it, so people.
But how's that related to the?
So it's the same sort of religious practice, I guess, within that same our old ways, that we sort of kept. So we kept FGM.
Right. I like how you are going, going back to roots and tradition, but you're also not so in love with it that you're apologizing for it. Like for example, where I come from, like in Iran, for example, people that hate Islam, they want to go back to Zoroastrianism because that's the ancient religion of the land, but they glorify it in a way that as if it had no problems and it was like everything was great. But I like how you are so honest about the things that you learn. Like you don't try to sugarcoat it or like, look at everything.
Yeah. No, the same. I was going to say the same thing. And the other thing, when you talk about retaining how, we decide to keep FGM in the Somali community, a lot of that happens because, a lot of Muslim majority countries kept slavery for the longest time too, because even though slavery preceded Islam, right? Islam came and endorsed it. It reinforced the thing that this is okay. So with FGM, the Shafi'i school of thought, in Sunni Islam, the Shafi'i madhab,
which is more popular in Africa, right? North Africa.
Yeah,
more popular in African.
Indonesia as well, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Indonesia, Malaysia, yeah. So over there, it's also where they also have. Indonesia has about an 86% prevalence of FGM. So, and that's the largest Muslim majority country in the world. So. Egypt is the largest Arab country in the world. So the largest Muslim country, the largest Arab country have more than 80% prevalence of FGM. So, and they say it's not an Islamic problem. So even if it precedes Islam as a tradition, the fact that Islam came in, endorsed it, and reinforced that this is okay is significant.
Yeah, religion doesn't invent this kind of barbarism. It just provides an excuse for it. That's what religion. That's how religion harms. Like a lot of people try to come up with excuses for religion by trying to find different sources for its barbarism. But that's not how religion poisons things. Religion poisons things by giving you a heavenly license for those barbarism, for an excuse, as a shield, as defense against criticism.
So you talked about Malcolm X. What about? And I have to get this in because I know a lot of people are going to be interested in this. The Nation of Islam. So Malcolm X was part of the Nation of Islam. Louis Farrakhan, who is a very, very sort of prominent, he's back in the news again because all of the idiocy of the past, the stuff that we thought we had settled, is now somehow back in the news again. But he is. So how do I know? Like people from the Nation of Islam, there's a little bit of tension between them and the sort of conventional Muslims because they're considered the real Muslims. The Nation of Islam is considered to be sort of like fake,
weird offshoot.
Offshoot. So and Malcolm X belonged to that too. So how
I agree with traditional Muslims about how weird Nation of Islam is. By the way.
Okay, well,
it is a very weird thing. Yes.
But yeah, can you? What do you know about that? Are you familiar with it? And can you speak to it a little bit?
To be honest, I don't know too much about it, but all I know it is quite the strange phenomena. Like, for example, Elijah Muhammad had, I think, a manifesto where he talked about white people being created in a scientific lab. It's really intense. Some really like on an island to destroy the black race. Just a lot of really ridiculous nonsense. I totally agree with Armin in the sense that I agree with traditional Muslims.
Right.
Yeah.
That it's and look like. Though I believe Islam is Arab supremacist, I don't think, I agree with Armin that it's not, I guess it doesn't inherently encourage racism,
Right.
It's just...
Still tribalism, though. Different form of tribal.
Still tribal, right. So it sort of encourages, I would say, an erasure of your culture.
Right.
Which is, it's more insidious, I would say, in some ways, but, it's more gradual rather than, overt, sort of.
Right. Okay. Now let's go to the stuff that you want to talk about.
I could talk to you about this forever. I feel like I want to
Definitely
come down to
gotta do
Australia and just
for sure.
sit down and so much stuff to ask you, and I feel like we're just moving, but I guess we have to move along.
Yeah, this is why it's very important that you're starting a podcast, because I think you have so much, there's so much nuance and information about the things that you've experienced and knows.
Yeah, when you starting at the Waq Nation?
We've already got. I was going to say Waq Nation. We've actually got the first episode up, and the first episode is going to be about. So my co-host on the Waq Nation is going to. He's actually organised a survey on Somali ex-Muslims. So he organised some questions, and so we're going to talk about the results of that survey on the first episode.
When I met you in Australia, there was someone. What was her name? Someone with you.
I was going to say that was my relative. I won't mention her.
Oh, yeah, is she your co-host? No.
No, she's not my co-host. I was going to say she's like
no. Okay.
Yeah, like still.
We won't mention her.
That's I wasn't going to mention her. I was just wondering if that's the co-host. Yeah. Okay.
No. Yeah.
By the way, to our patrons that have requested that I stop talking about the reform movement, I just want to mention that this is a topic that our guest wants to talk about. I'm not bringing it up.
Trigger warning.
No, because some people are tired about me constantly bringing up the reform movement. So I just want to it's not me, okay? But I'm happy that you actually want to bring it up. But go on.
So what are we talking about?
So let's. Well, I mean, we're actually talking about it in a little bit different way, because we're going to talk about Ayaan, and I know that eventually we're going to talk about her defense of the reform movement. But you wanted to mention Ayaan Hirsi Ali because she's Somalian, as Ali mentioned at the beginning of the show. And has she had a major influence in the Somali community and the way they look at Islam? Does she do people see her as a hero or?
Yeah, honestly, I have to say this quickly because some other Somali ex-Muslims will want me to say. I think a lot of Somali ex-Muslims also are upset at a lot of prominent ex-Muslims for not giving her enough credit, because we kind of feel that Ayaan paved the way for this movement, and she copped the most heat because she's a black woman as well too. She's a woman, she's black, and we feel that now a lot of ex-Muslims do give her that credit and acknowledgement, but there was definitely a period where there wasn't much mention of how much work she has done in this space.
Really?
She's kind of put her body down for life.
Because to us, she's been a hero in the movement.
I mean, to you, I mean, and Yasmin and stuff. But I'm saying that is a critique some Somali ex-Muslims feel.
Right.
They feel like she's kind of.
I mean, she's one of the main names that comes up when we think about ex-Muslim leaders.
Well, she's actually the first. She literally is the first. I mean, she started doing this stuff before Dawkins and the Four Horsemen, all of that, and she was.
And she copped most of the heat, and that's what. That's why we're kind of protective of her, because she obviously copped most of the heat, and people say horrible things about Ayaan.
I think. I know why a lot of people abandon her because she getting close to conservative circles and stuff like that. Right.
And this, I don't really, I don't feel like we have to agree on every single thing as ex-Muslims.
Yeah.
I think it's okay.
Yeah,
to have different, a diversity of beliefs.
I gotta say, I have. We spent a whole weekend with her in Palo Alto once for and this was. She is just one of the most. I don't know.
I'm so jealous, by the way. I'm so jealous. Yeah, she's.
No, we had so much fun with her. I mean, she's absolutely fantastic. She's very, extremely, just elegant and classy. Just an amazing woman. I do have disagreements with her. When she said Netanyahu should win the Nobel Peace Prize, I'm like, okay, no, but but it's. The way that she came out and she just started speaking against Islam unapologetically, speaking against Muhammad, criticizing Muhammad, right, unapologetically, and just said it very, very openly. I mean, in a way that even Salman Rushdie or nobody else had done that, and she did pave the way. She actually normalized a lot of things.
Yeah, she really did normalize dissent, by putting her body on the line.
And Infidel is just.
I mean, her producer.
Infidel is one of the best books you're ever going to read of all time.
Her producer of her show was killed. She was she was in real danger. Like, we're not talking
Right.
about death threats or like, find doxing or stuff like that. No, people actually were looking to kill her, actively planning to kill her, and they got as close as
She
their
still has
producer.
security.
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I've been
Oh,
to
she
her.
did. Yeah,
I
we
went,
saw that she had security that entire
let me
weekend.
make my point. Yeah, no, I did. I
Yeah.
went to her event, and she has major security everywhere she goes. But the thing is that I know most ex-Muslims are liberal, and they become liberal because Islam is right wing, and when you go away from Islam, you want to become as far away as whatever that is as possible. So most ex-Muslims are liberal. Some of them are not, but most of them are. And when Ayaan became very close to conservative, think tanks and media, a lot of them were very, very disappointed, right? And they abandoned her as their hero, but which is very hypocritical, because as ex-Muslims, we are part of the ex-Muslim movement, right? Is to try to get people to accept ex-Muslims, even if they don't agree with us, right? Like, we want the Muslim. We try to make it, get a lot of Muslims to leave Islam, but for the ones that stay Muslim, we want them to treat us like fellow human beings, even though we are completely against everything they believe in. That's the demand that we're making. Like, we stand against everything that you hold dear, and we want you to treat us like respectfully, right? And we have to do what we preach. We have to respect, we have to accept people that we have huge disagreements with. And my disagreements with Ayaan is not based on this conservative liberal thing. Like, I disagree with Ayaan a lot ever since her last book, when she started preaching Islamic heretic. Like, yeah, I mean, I loved her earlier books, but the last book, she started defending Islamic reform, and when I read it, I was like, I could not even see what her point was. Like, it was for me, that was a huge disappointment, and I did not like that book at all. But actually, I still liked it. I enjoyed reading it. But I disagree with. Actually, I probably enjoyed it more because I disagree with it. But the point is that she's still my hero.
Masochism.
No, because it's more fun to if you.
I know.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter that I disagree with her. She's still my hero, and I hope that she's still.
I just want to clarify something, though. Right. I don't think that Ayaan is a conservative. This is why it's something that I feel defensive of. I don't feel like she's conservative. I just think that those are the only people that will give her a platform.
Right.
I agree, exactly.
But it doesn't matter. But that's not a defense.
Such a controversial figure.
Right.
No, I don't agree. I disagree. Like, this is a woman that's an academic that has, been shunned from so many.
But I don't like that defense. Can I tell you why I don't like that defense? A lot of people are like, we shouldn't abandon Ayaan because she's not really a conservative. She just goes on these platforms because that's the only place I give her a platform. That to me suggests that the argument is that if she was a conservative, she wouldn't be our hero. Like, to me, like, even if I know you're right, I know, like, she has very liberal, a lot of liberal views, and she went on these platforms because that was the only places that would invite her. But even if she was completely conservative, the fact that she's
I wouldn't personally care. It wouldn't bother me personally if she was personally conservative. But I'm just clarifying what she is saying, just to not mischaracterize her views. Right. Because she has called herself. She has said that, even in her books that, like, for example, what's that place in Washington that gave her that real right-wing think tank? What's it called?
American Enterprise Institute.
Exactly. That she copped a lot of heat for taking up a job there, for joining there. But they were the only people that give her a platform in the US, and she needed a base. So I can I'm just
actually the Democrats who introduced her to the American Enterprise Institute. So the other thing is, like, I'll tell you what my take was on it is that I think that she is truly independent. Like, in terms of, I don't think she's conservative or she's liberal. There are things you're going to disagree with. Like, when she was talking about confirming Brett Kavanaugh, I mean, I thought that was disappointing to me. There's a lot of things that
a lot of people upset at that. A lot of people.
And so there
Honestly,
is a thing. And
that's a brave stance, though. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, well, another brave stance, Armin, is that what she does is that she supports a lot of these reform people, right? Who are and often because they have a lot more influence and they're more public than the sort of ex-Muslims. Ex-Muslims tend to be more liberal. The reform people tend to be uniformly more aligned with conservatives, right? So that's also a reason why a lot of her connections Yeah. Like if you look at Hassan Amani, you look at Zudi Jasser, you look at like all of these guys. I mean, these are conservative leaning people. They are declared.
Majid is not
Really?
Majid is not conservative.
Majid is like the island. He's the only one who's like left standing.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
love Majid. Majid, yeah.
He's the only one who's in but the rest of them, all these guys, Tariq Fatah, like, they're all sort of. They're all right-leaning. I mean, if not completely right-wing.
No, but
and they're declared.
But Ayaan doesn't.
But what is right anyway now? Honest to God, I'm so sorry, but maybe I'm lost here. But right to me now, what is right anyway?
Okay, let's say conservative.
Yeah, let's say conservative.
And, what do you mean when you say right? I'm saying you're talking about like it's just these words mean nothing anymore.
Okay, right or left, I don't know what it means anymore. But conservative and liberal still have.
It's right. Right is basically conservative fringe.
Right.
Right. So in a way, so
but
that is has more influence. But what I was saying was like the reform people, right? So that's another thing, Armin. Like she actually does support that, and I agree with you that I found. Like the Brett Kavanaugh thing, the everything, all of this stuff is related. Her husband is also a conservative professor at Harvard. I mean, and he's a great guy. He's, I mean, I don't know him personally, I should say that, but he's great in the sense. Niall Ferguson. So he's a great writer. Every time he writes something, he's one of those sort of old school conservatives who I respect a lot. But it's she is truly an independent. She really, I mean, I gathered that from her. But one thing I noticed was that she loved meeting. I felt like she hadn't actually met open ex-Muslims like properly before. Like like she had been hanging around with. I felt like she has just been around a lot of these reform people who she feels like the only people who are close.
It was
to her
the Arab Spring that she gave her hope with Islam. That's I actually read her book.
Yeah, but the ex-Muslim thing is so new that I
was so young compared
exhilarated.
to her.
Yeah,
we call her Auntie Ayaan. Actually, I call her Auntie Ayaan in my head. Like she's because we're so much younger than her and stuff like that. Yeah, she's a queen, but I literally call her Ed Ayaan, like Auntie Ayaan in Somali. Like we actually hope that I've spoke with other Somali ex-Muslims that one day she will do a talk in Somali and address her own community, because we think that she's like copped that much backlash, and definitely all Somalis have written her off. Like they're so ashamed of her. But at the same time, there's a growing number of Somali ex-Muslims. Like so much so, I heard that recently a sheikh in Toronto was talking about how Somalis are the number one demographic after Persians, Iranians. The number one group of ex-Muslims is Somali. So this sheikh was trying to tell the congregation to be like, guys, do something about the children. Watch out for your kids, because it's. So I said this to say, we really hope that Ayaan, since she means so much to us, Somali ex-Muslims, because she really speaks to our story. So that she'll one day address Somali ex-Muslims, you know what I mean? And
I really think she's more interested in the reformists than the ex-Muslims. I think we need more heroes from the Somali community, like more people that are actually interested in the ex-Muslim movement rather than the reform movement. And maybe you could be the future.
That is why we have you on here.
Yes.
Can I just say, I just want to say that the Somali community is one of the most dangerous Muslim communities. Like the kinds of hate and death threats that I get just for Twitter posts. Like the whole reason why I'm talking to you guys is because I've literally become infamous, of Twitter posts, because I've gotten death threats, I've gotten people trying to dox me. Actually, the whole reason why I told my family up front was because I was getting so much threats from the Somali community. It's a real collectivist culture.
Wait, so you got death threats and doxing and all that stuff, and you decided, let me step up a little bit more and start a podcast as well. Like, so what's
I kind of feel like you got to share your story before people tell it for you. Right. You know what I'm saying?
So what motivates you? Like, why are you given all the costs that you have to pay for speaking out? Why are you? Why do you do this?
Well, to be honest, I was really minding my own business, just criticizing Islam, because Islam, as a woman in my own life, I felt it was very suffocating,
Right.
I just couldn't do the things that I want. I always felt restricted. So I was just minding my own business, criticizing Islam. I just didn't anticipate the whole Ummah turning on me. So then once I realized, oh, wow, 13 Muslim countries are actually beheading people for apostasy. And then just hanging, and just talking to other Somali ex-Muslims, shout out to them, by the way. A lot of people have to be undercover because, you know, their families will beat them or like, you know, kill them, things like that. The pressure out there is really serious. So I just feel like, you know, you got to use your privileges.
Right.
And I'm pretty lucky to be born in Australia.
I do, Ali, I think Ali agrees, but we do want to highlight more ex-Muslims from Somalia. So if you ever bring on a guest or somebody that you want us to highlight as well, or recommend like that this would be a really good guest, let us know so that we could highlight them.
For sure.
Right.
Well, there's like I said, there are so many, and trust me, like if you guys think I'm great, there's so many great Somali ex-Muslims, just such great thinkers. But there is the threat of violence that is really real.
Right.
So there is that, but I'm sure, just from today's episode, that it will encourage more to come out.
That's great. I mean, it's amazing that you're saying it's one of the top countries that is producing ex-Muslims, and the ex-Muslim movement itself hasn't been highlighting Somalia that much yet. So, I mean,
Somali ex-Muslims will say that it's still an inherent anti-blackness. A lot of
I mean, but even Ayaan herself is focusing on reformists, not ex-Muslims. So if anybody thinks this is racism, I'm gonna point to Ayaan.
I'm not saying it's racism, but I'm just saying the fact that people don't think of black ex-Muslims is kind of a blind spot, if you like. I'm not saying it's racism. I'm just saying that it exists. You know,
right?
Anti-black exists. It's a reality. So
yeah, actually.
But anyways. I'm gonna have to wrap this up. I've been chatting with you guys for like 2 hours, but
yeah, that's fine. So, how much time do you have? Do you have time to take a couple of quick questions?
Just 2 questions.
I was gonna say I've got 10 minutes, and then
good. So let's go to the questions then. Okay.
Let's do it now. Right. Okay, so one question is, do you think Black American Muslim converts are ignorant to these things, or just dismiss them because there is a?
Well, I feel like it's a bit of wishful thinking. Because they're in a situation where, you know, they were enslaved by Europeans and so on, they want to believe that maybe there were other Africans out there that weren't enslaved and were in a position of power, and Islam gave them that power. But that's just not true.
Okay. Can you ask Mike's question? Because I think Mike's question is agreeing with what I'm saying. But okay, Mike is basically saying, this is more of a comment than a question, but he's saying in Poland we had to learn Russian at school. Does that mean that Soviets were racist against Poles? So I think Mike is kind of suggesting that I'm right there. That's the thanks.
No, it doesn't make sense. It's not the same. Right. It's a false equivalence, because in Islam you have to learn. People don't understand that you don't just read the Quran in the English translation or African translation. You read it in Arabic. And you don't just read it in any Arabic, you read it in Fusha Arabic. So you have to even learn tajweed a certain kind of way. Right. So all of that means that Arab culture is, I guess, given priority over whatever culture that you're from. Right. So that is what I'm saying is racist.
So right. let's
I'm not saying individuals, it's a system.
Okay, let's go. We have to ask this. Sorry, Armin, did you have a quick thing?
No, I just wanted to leave it earlier than 10 minutes because I just want to go off air and ask something from you before you go. So it ended before 10 minutes because it just
we have to ask you this because a lot of people are going to want to know about this. So I actually had to note it down before. What are your thoughts on Ilhan Omar? Have you been following some of the issues there, her sort of evolution and since she got elected?
Right. Yeah, look, I'm not American, so I got to put that disclaimer out there. I have to say this. You know, I'm a Somali woman, so when I see Ilhan, I have to admit, like when I see her face on the screen, I do feel a sense of pride, you know. I do want her to win. You know, do I agree with her politically? Absolutely not. You know, it's a bit of a conflict for me because when I see her, I'm so proud of her. I'm in awe of, you have to understand where we come from. We're from war-torn Somalia. It's a failed state, you know, so for her to achieve those heights in Congress, US Congress, I'm like, yay for you. But I have to say that she's in a very difficult position. I just need people to understand that the same people that got her elected, which is the Muslim community,
they hate her.
They need her to talk about their issues. And Palestine is, I personally, I'm not even going to give my stance on that. So, you know, I believe Israel has the right position.
This is a great answer, though. But keep going.
That sounds like an entire episode, but go on.
Yeah, I just feel like, so So I feel like you have to understand that the Ummah is very serious about what's happening in Palestine, particularly the Somali community. The Somali community that's become radicalized. They're extremely passionate about the rights of the Palestinians. So if she steps out of line, you have to understand they will take her head off. Like, as in, if she does not advocate for them, these people put her in power. Those votes are what got her where she is. So if she doesn't get up on there and advocate for the thing, she's, shooting herself in the foot. And then at the same time, you have to understand now she's copying backlash from the Somali community and then the wider Ummah because she's pro-LGBT because she's a Democrat.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
I don't envy her at all. I empathize with her because she's really between a rock and a hard place. I think a lot of the things that I think she potentially would be a lot more moderate personally. But, when you're at that level and you're representing that many people, unfortunately, sometimes it is a conflict. You have many conflicts of interest.
She does.
Do you have thoughts about do you have thoughts about, for instance, how you were talking about how Ayaan copped a lot of hate because she was, she was a black woman, she was Somalian and everything. And now like this, Trump had a pinned tweet, saying, I thought that her comments about 9/11 were very poorly worded as well, but the way that they added 2 + 2 and got like 514, right? And they did that. It was actually, I thought it was terrible. Do you feel the same way that she similar to what Ayaan copped hate, or are you less sympathetic?
No, I don't think. I don't like Ayaan.
Oh yeah, I'm just asking the question. I'm not saying I don't.
No, I know you're not saying that, but no, I don't. And I think that Ilhan is a big girl. You know what I'm saying? She's a big woman. She knows what she's doing, and unfortunately, she's made a lot of enemies. So I just think it comes with it.
I follow a lot of Muslim content, and I can just tell you, a lot of people from our side think that, she's getting a lot of criticism from ex-Muslims and conservatives. It's nothing compared to the attack that she's getting from Muslims. Because,
that's what I'm saying.
The Muslim community is, because she's supporting gay rights and some other liberal things, the amount of shit that is coming her way from Muslims is astronomically higher, right? And this goes back to what we were saying earlier. We can congratulate somebody from being able to achieve that much while disagreeing with them at the same time. Because I disagree with you for supporting, being so anti-Israeli or whatever. We could point that out, but we don't have to hate on people just because we're pointing out our disagreement with them. I think people just take their disagreements way too personally, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I did write an article about Ilhan Omar recently for the New York Post. So I'll put the link to this podcast too. I have.
Let's end it here because I have to tell her something.
I know. I just wish we could keep you for longer. I have so many things in my head that I want to ask you, but I know that you've been very, very generous with your time. So thank you so much, and I really hope to hear more of your voice out there, and I hope you go out there and really, really. speak up. I can't wait to get your podcast. We're going to put a link to it. So just send me whatever else you want me to put here, and we're going to promote it. So, yeah, thank you very much. And to the patrons who sent in questions,
thank you.
Everybody, thank you very much.
Aaron, Mike, love you guys. Bye.
SecularJihadist.com. You can go there. You can become a patron at patreon.com/STME. Sign up over there. And you'll have access to the video of this conversation and loads of other conversations with loads of other amazing people. Right. So, thanks.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.